Let me ask you something. When did being alone become something you were afraid of? When did silence start sounding like failure? Because the truth is this, most people never discover who they are, because they're too busy following who everyone else is. Walking alone is not weakness. Walking alone is power. And today I want to show you why. When you walk alone, something rare and powerful begins to happen. You are forced to confront yourself without filters. No crowd to blend into, no noise to drown out the truth, no borrowed confidence from familiar faces. It's just you and your reflection, and that moment is uncomfortable for most people. That's why they avoid it. But discomfort is not danger, it's direction. Walking alone strips away every mask you've ever wanted to fit in, every version of yourself you created to be accepted. And when all that falls away, what remains is raw identity, not who you pretend to be, not who they expect you to be, who you actually are. That kind of self-awareness is rare, and rare is powerful. When you are constantly surrounded by others, your identity becomes negotiated. You adjust your tone, you soften your opinions, you shrink your truth just enough to stay liked. Over time, you forget which parts of you are real and which parts were survival tactics. Walking alone ends that confusion. You stop asking, will they approve? And start asking, is this aligned with who I am? And that shift changes everything. Decisions become clearer. Boundaries become stronger. You no longer need permission to exist fully. You stop auditioning for acceptance and start standing in authenticity. That's not arrogance, that's self-respect. Walking alone teaches you how to trust your own judgment. No second opinions, no reassurance texts, no one clapping when you make the hard choice. You learn to sit with uncertainty and still move forward. And every time you do, confidence compounds. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, quiet, grounded confidence that doesn't shake under pressure. You begin to realize that you don't need consensus to be correct. You don't need agreement to be committed. And once you trust yourself, manipulation loses its grip. Fear loses its leverage. Because the strongest voice in your life finally becomes your own. There is a moment on the path of walking alone when insecurity tries to make a comeback. It whispers that maybe you're wrong, maybe you're missing out, maybe everyone else knows something you don't. But here's the truth, most people follow the noise because they're afraid of the silence. Silence reveals flaws, but it also reveals purpose. And when you stay long enough in that silence, you begin to recognize patterns in your thoughts, your habits, your reactions. You don't judge them, you study them. That self-mastery is the foundation of leadership. You can't lead others if you've never learned how to lead yourself. Identity built in solitude is unbreakable because it wasn't crowdsourced, it wasn't voted on, it wasn't influenced by trends or temporary applause. It was earned through reflection, through discipline, through honesty. When criticism comes, and it will, you don't crumble because you already know who you are. When praise comes, you don't get addicted because you didn't build yourself on compliments. You become steady, grounded, centered, and in a world addicted to external validation, that kind of internal certainty is revolutionary. Walking alone also teaches you patience with yourself. When no one is rushing you, comparing timelines, or projecting expectations, you move at your own pace. You stop measuring your worth by speed and start measuring it by alignment. You realize that becoming takes time, and that's not a weakness. That's wisdom. You begin to honor growth instead of perfection. And in that space, identity evolves naturally, not forcefully. You don't rush to label yourself. You live your way into truth. And that truth becomes your compass, guiding every decision, every relationship, every risk you take from that point forward. So if you feel alone right now, understand this. You are not lost. You are being introduced to yourself. This is where identity is forged, confidence is born, and purpose begins to breathe. Walk the path. Stay with yourself. Because once you know who you are, nothing and no one can ever take that power away from you. Most people don't realize how crowded average really is. It's loud, it's busy, it's comfortable, and it's filled with people convincing each other that comfort is the same thing as happiness. When you choose to walk alone, you step out of that noise. You step away from familiar conversations, familiar routines, familiar limits, and suddenly you feel exposed. That exposure is not a mistake. It's the moment you begin separating from the pack. Average survives by blending in. Walking alone demands that you stand out, even when your legs are shaking and your voice feels unsteady. That decision alone puts you ahead of most people, because most people would rather be accepted than be exceptional. The crowd will always reward what's familiar. They clap for what they recognize. They celebrate what feels safe. That's why extraordinary paths rarely come with instant approval. When you start walking alone, you notice how often people question you, not because your vision is wrong, but because it threatens their comfort. Your independence becomes a mirror, reflecting what they were too afraid to pursue. And instead of asking themselves hard questions, they try to pull you back into what they understand. This is where many people turn around. They mistake resistance for a sign to stop. But resistance is often proof that you're moving beyond average thinking. Walking alone forces you to redefine success on your own terms. When you're surrounded by others, it's easy to measure your progress by their milestones, their promotions, their timelines, their definitions of making it. But once you step away, comparison loses its power. You stop racing and start building. You realize that success isn't about speed, it's about direction. And direction becomes clear only when you're not distracted by everyone else's path. This is where vision sharpens. You stop chasing what looks impressive and start committing to what feels meaningful, even if no one else sees it yet. There's a cost to separating from average, and that cost is loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being unloved, but the kind that comes from being misunderstood. You will outgrow conversations that once felt exciting. You will lose interest in habits that once felt normal. And at times, you'll wonder if the trade was worth it. But here's the truth. Average costs more in the long run. It costs your potential. It costs your curiosity. It costs the version of you that could have been. Walking alone may feel heavy now, but staying average becomes unbearable later. As you continue forward, something shifts internally. You begin to realize that you don't need permission to think bigger. You don't need validation to dream differently. You stop waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to want more. This is where self-leadership is born. You become your own standard, your own motivator, your own accountability. And once that happens, average can no longer contain you. You've expanded beyond it. You've seen too much, felt too much, learned too much to shrink back down. Eventually, the very thing that made you feel isolated becomes your advantage. Your perspective becomes sharper because it wasn't shaped by consensus. Your resilience becomes stronger because it wasn't cushioned by comfort. You develop a hunger that can't be satisfied by mediocrity and a discipline that doesn't rely on praise. People will look at your life one day and call it overnight success, never realizing how many quiet steps you took alone, how many moments you chose discomfort over conformity, how many times you kept walking when average begged you to stay. So if you feel like you're drifting away from the crowd, don't panic, pay attention. That distance is not rejection, it's elevation. You are not losing people, you are losing limits. Keep walking. Because the moment you separate from average is the moment you step into the life you were never meant to blend into. When you walk alone, there is no safety net beneath you. No one to catch you when motivation disappears. No one to blame when things don't go as planned. And that is exactly where mental discipline is born. Discipline is not created in moments of excitement, it is forged in moments of resistance. Walking alone places you face to face with resistance every single day. The resistance to quit, the resistance to delay, the resistance to choose comfort over commitment. And every time you push through that resistance without an audience, your mind becomes stronger. Not louder, stronger. You stop relying on emotional highs and start operating from inner control. At first, your mind will rebel. It will crave distraction. It will search for excuses. It will replay old habits that once kept you comfortable. Walking alone removes the external structures that used to hold you accountable. Friends, schedules, expectations. Suddenly, the only thing standing between progress and stagnation is your ability to govern your own behavior. That's uncomfortable because it exposes the truth. Most people are not undisciplined because they lack time or resources. They are undisciplined because they've never trained their mind to lead instead of follow. Walking alone becomes that training ground. Mental discipline means doing what needs to be done long after the desire to do it fades. And when you walk alone, desire becomes unreliable. Some days you feel inspired, other days you feel empty. Discipline is what carries you through both. It teaches you how to act without negotiation. You stop asking yourself, do I feel like it? And start asking, what does this moment require? That shift is powerful. It removes emotion from decision making and replaces it with intention. And once your actions are driven by intention, consistency becomes inevitable. Walking alone also teaches you how to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. Most people numb themselves when things get hard, through noise, people, habits, or distractions. Solitude takes that option away. You feel everything more intensely: doubt, fear, fatigue, uncertainty. But instead of breaking you, that intensity sharpens you. You learn that emotions are temporary, but discipline is transferable. What you build in one area of life carries into every other area. The ability to endure discomfort without quitting becomes a skill, and skills compound. As your mental discipline grows, so does your self-respect. You begin to trust yourself because you've proven you can follow through without supervision. You say you'll show up, and you do. You say you'll finish, and you finish. That internal trust changes how you move through the world. You stop over-explaining. You stop seeking reassurance. You don't need constant affirmation because your confidence is rooted in evidence, your own actions. And when life throws chaos your way, you don't collapse. You adapt. Because a disciplined mind is not fragile, it's flexible and focused. Eventually, walking alone rewires how you define strength. Strength stops being about intensity and starts being about consistency. You realize that small, disciplined actions repeated daily are more powerful than rare bursts of effort. This is where many people fall off. They chase motivation instead of mastering discipline. But you've learned something different. You've learned how to move forward when no one is watching, when progress feels invisible, when results are delayed. And that ability is rare. That ability is what separates those who start from those who finish. So if this path feels heavy right now, understand what's happening. You're not being punished. You're being trained. Your mind is becoming resilient. Your focus is becoming sharper. Your discipline is becoming automatic. Keep walking, because a person who can command their own mind can never be controlled by circumstance. And that is real power. When you start walking alone, something subtle but unavoidable begins to happen. The noise around you changes. Conversations feel different. Interactions feel thinner. People who once felt close now feel distant, even when they're standing right next to you. At first, this can feel like loss. You may wonder what you did wrong, why the energy shifted, why certain connections no longer feel natural. But this isn't failure, it's filtration. Walking alone doesn't push people away, it reveals who was never truly walking with you to begin with. And that truth, while uncomfortable, is one of the most valuable lessons you will ever learn. When you stop needing approval, some people stop showing up. When you stop over-explaining, some people stop listening. When you stop shrinking to make others comfortable, some people feel exposed. Walking alone disrupts unspoken agreements. Agreements where you are expected to stay the same, play a role, or remain predictable. And when you break those agreements, not everyone will celebrate your growth. Some will resist it, some will misunderstand it, some will quietly exit your life. This is not betrayal, it is alignment correcting itself. You are not being abandoned, you are being redirected. You begin to notice patterns you once ignored, who only calls when they need something, who disappears when you stop entertaining them, who supports you in words but not in action. Walking alone sharpens your perception because you're no longer distracted by proximity or history. You stop confusing familiarity with loyalty. You stop mistaking shared memories for shared values. And this clarity changes how you choose people moving forward. You no longer look for who is loudest. You look for who is consistent. You no longer chase connection. You protect alignment. There is grief in this process and it deserves to be acknowledged. Letting go of people you once imagined would be part of your future is painful. Not because they were bad, but because they were part of a chapter that has ended. Walking alone forces you to accept that some relationships were seasonal, not permanent. And clinging to them out of nostalgia only delays your growth. Growth requires space, and space requires release. You can appreciate what someone meant to you without dragging them into where you were going next. As your circle gets smaller, your standards get higher. You realize that energy matters more than numbers, that peace matters more than popularity, that alignment matters more than history. Walking alone recalibrates your tolerance. You no longer tolerate draining conversations, passive support, or conditional loyalty. You stop explaining your boundaries and start enforcing them. And while this may make you less accessible, it makes you more grounded. You trade shallow connection for meaningful presence. And that trade is always worth it. Eventually, the right people begin to appear, but not in crowds. They arrive quietly, intentionally. They don't need convincing because they recognize your frequency. These are the people who don't compete with your growth, don't question your solitude, don't feel threatened by your independence. They don't need constant access to feel secure. Walking alone teaches you to recognize these people, not by what they say, but by how they show up. And because you've learned to stand on your own, you don't cling to them. You walk beside them, whole, not dependent. So if your circle is shrinking, don't panic. Expansion often begins with subtraction. You are not losing people. You are gaining clarity. You are not becoming distant. You are becoming discerning. Keep walking, because the path you're on doesn't require many companions, only the right ones. And now you finally know the difference. When you walk alone, the first thing you notice is the quiet, not just around you, but inside you. The constant noise of opinions fades. The pressure to explain yourself dissolves. And in that silence, something begins to surface that most people never hear clearly. Purpose. Purpose doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It doesn't beg for attention. It waits patiently beneath the noise, and walking alone finally gives it room to rise. This is where you stop reacting to life and start listening to it. Not to trends, not to expectations, to that deep, steady pull that has been with you longer than fear ever has. Purpose is impossible to discover when you're busy comparing your life to everyone else's. Comparison fractures focus. It scatters energy. When you walk alone, comparison loses its grip because there's no one beside you to measure against. You stop asking, am I ahead or behind? And start asking, am I aligned? That question changes everything. You begin to notice what energizes you and what drains you, what feels meaningful and what feels empty, and slowly, intentionally, you start building a life that makes sense to, not a life that looks good to others. Walking alone strips away the urgency to impress. You stop chasing applause because there's no audience. You stop performing because there's no one to perform for. And in that freedom, your actions become more honest. You don't choose paths because they're popular. You choose them because they feel necessary. Purpose thrives in honesty. It grows when your actions match your values. And solitude gives you the courage to admit what you truly want, even when it contradicts what you were taught to want. That honesty is the doorway to real fulfillment. There will be moments when purpose feels unclear, even in solitude. That's part of the process. Purpose is not a destination, it's a direction. Walking alone teaches you patience with that unfolding. You learn to trust small signals instead of demanding instant clarity. You follow curiosity. You follow conviction. You follow what feels like growth, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. And with every step taken in alignment, purpose sharpens. It becomes less about titles and outcomes, and more about contribution and impact. You stop asking, what do I get? And start asking, what do I give? As purpose becomes clearer, your priorities shift. You no longer waste energy on things that don't matter. You protect your time, you guard your focus, you become intentional with your yes and powerful with your no. Walking alone teaches you that purpose requires sacrifice, not as punishment, but as commitment. You let go of distractions that dilute your vision. You release habits that pull you backward. And in doing so, your life begins to feel lighter, not heavier, because alignment removes internal conflict. You're no longer fighting yourself. Eventually, purpose stops feeling like something you're searching for and starts feeling like something you're living. It shows up in how you speak, how you work, how you treat others, how you handle adversity. Walking alone has given you the clarity to move with intention instead of impulse. You're no longer driven by fear of missing out. You're guided by fear of missing yourself. And that awareness becomes your compass. No matter how uncertain the road ahead may be, you know why you're walking. So if the path feels quiet right now, don't rush to fill it. That silence is sacred. That solitude is intentional. This is where purpose is born, not in crowds, not in noise, not in comparison, but in the courage to walk alone long enough to hear your own calling clearly. Stay the course. Because once purpose finds you, every step you've taken will finally make sense. Walking alone does not protect you from pain. It introduces you to it in its rawest form. When you remove distractions, when you step away from comfort, when you stop leaning on people for emotional cushioning, pain becomes impossible to avoid. It shows up in the quiet moments, in the unanswered questions, in the nights where doubt feels heavier than hope. But pain is not the enemy here. Pain is the instructor. Most people spend their lives running from it, numbing it or disguising it. Walking alone forces you to face it directly, and in doing so, you begin to understand its purpose. Pain arrives not to break you, but to wake you up. There is a moment in solitude where pain asks you a question: will you let this define you, or will you let this refine you? That moment is critical, because pain, when left unexamined, becomes bitterness. But pain, when confronted with awareness, becomes wisdom. Walking alone gives you the space to process instead of react. You stop rushing to escape discomfort and start extracting meaning from it. You begin to see patterns, what hurt you, why it hurt, and what it's trying to teach you. That level of emotional intelligence doesn't come from advice, it comes from experience endured consciously. As you continue forward, you realize that every painful moment has been shaping you quietly. Rejection teaches discernment. Failure teaches humility. Loneliness teaches self-sufficiency. Loss teaches appreciation. None of these lessons feel gentle while they're happening, but they are precise. Pain cuts away illusions. It removes dependency. It strengthens emotional muscle. And because you're walking alone, there's no one to distort the lesson or soften the truth. You receive it fully. And what is received fully can be transformed fully. Walking alone also changes how you relate to your past wounds. Instead of seeing them as scars to hide, you begin to see them as evidence of survival. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What did this give me?" That shift is powerful. It turns victimhood into agency. You realize that resilience is not something you're born with. It's something you earn through repeated exposure to adversity without surrender. Pain becomes less intimidating because you've learned that you can endure it and still move forward. Eventually, something unexpected happens. You become grounded, calm, centered. Not because life stopped being hard, but because you stopped being fragile. Walking alone taught you how to carry weight without collapsing, how to feel deeply without being consumed, how to stand in uncertainty without losing yourself. Pain no longer controls your decisions, it informs them. You don't rush into connections to avoid loneliness. You don't chase validation to soothe insecurity. You don't fear struggle because you've survived it before. This is where pain completes its transformation. It turns into empathy, into strength, into quiet authority. People can feel it when you speak, not because you're loud, but because you're real. You've lived what you're saying. You've walked through fire without an audience, and that authenticity resonates. Walking alone didn't harden you, it refined you. It didn't make you cold, it made you clear. And clarity is power. So if you're hurting right now, don't assume something has gone wrong. Pain is not a detour, it's part of the path. Let it shape you, not shrink you. Let it teach you, not trap you. Keep walking, even when it's heavy, because one day you'll realize the pain you survived alone became the strength you stand on forever.